word for power is dunamis, which is the source for the English words dynamic and dynamite. When I think of dynamite, I'm reminded of the old story. Many of you have probably heard it, about the fisherman and the game warden. One day the game warden told this fisherman he wanted to go fishing with him because he heard that he could catch a lot of fish. And so they're out in the boat, and the game warden's sitting there talking to them, and all of a sudden the fisherman reaches under his seat and pulls out a stick of dynamite, lights it, throws it into the lake, and when it explodes, just literally hundreds of fish come floating to the top. He gets his net out and pulls all the fish in, and the game warden's looking at him, wondering what he's doing. And he said, you really can't do that. He said, that's illegal. And the guy just kept raking the fish in. And so the game warden's scolding him and saying, you can't do that. You've just got to stop doing that. Don't ever do that again. And he reaches under his seat, pulls out another stick of dynamite, lights it, lets a fuse burn down for a few minutes. Then he hands it to the game warden and said, are you going to sit there and talk, or are you going to fish? Well, dynamite has a way of doing things, doesn't it? And when we think about the current events of the world, we may begin to wonder as to what is happening and why things happen. From the war zones across the ocean, in Europe and the Middle East, to our southern borders of our nation, we see people flexing power. That's what dunamis means, power. They're flexing their power to accomplish their goals. And it's often the power that allows nations to invade other nations, causing terror and havoc along the way. However, what we must remember is that power is not the same thing as authority. And although they do go hand in hand, they do have different meanings. You see, the bully on the playground may be the most powerful in the schoolyard, but that does not give him the authority to terrorize the rest of the students. Power is one thing, but authority is another. And we see this daily in our business world. When I was still working in my other career before my retirement, sometimes when I would work with clients, there were times that the financing agency that was financing the contract would not release the funds until not only they had a signature on the lease, but also a document showing that the person signing the lease had the authority to enter into a legal contract with that entity or on behalf of that entity. The signatory may have possessed the power, whereas the authorizing document gave that person the authority to use that power. And as power is inherent strength or ability, the authority is the right to use that power. So when we think of God, we see His power, and it is one of His characteristics. And His authority to use the power is an additional part of who He is. So not only does God have power, but He has the authority to use the power. And not only does He have the authority to use the power, He also has the authority to grant that power to whomever He chooses. You see, when we think about that, and when we think about Jesus, we see that there is no doubt that God sent Jesus into the world with a mission. From the Old Testament prophecies regarding the Messiah throughout the Gospels, we find that that fact to be most evident. And one instance of that is at the baptism of Jesus, as the Spirit descended upon him, the voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." So this brings us to our text today, which is Matthew chapter 11, verses 25 through 30. If you'd like to turn in your scriptures there, Matthew 11, 25 through 30. You'll see here the introduction of the sermon. Matthew 11. At that time, Jesus said, "I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, because this was your good pleasure. All things have been entrusted to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son desires to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." In verse 27 of that text, it says, "All things have been entrusted to me by my Father." These words demonstrate the fact that all authority was given to him by God. His authority was also proclaimed in Matthew 28:18 when he says, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth." So not only did he have the power from God, but he also had the authority to use his power. And Jesus' words in Matthew 28 proclaim that which he had already demonstrated. His power, his authority, his power. And throughout his ministry, Jesus demonstrated his authority by his actions. So let's stay in Luke or Matthew and turn to chapter 8, back 3 chapters. Going to make it easy today. We're going to have all of our text out of Matthew. But let's look at Matthew and see where Jesus showed his authority and his power. In Matthew 8:23. Matthew 8:23. As he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. Suddenly a violent storm arose on the sea so that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but Jesus kept sleeping. So the disciples came and woke him up, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to die." He said to them, "Why are you afraid, you of little faith?" Then he got up, rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the seas obey him." So the first thing that we see is Jesus had power and authority over nature. How many of us the other day went out to the snowstorm and said, "Stop snowing," and it did? I don't think any of us could do that. And if we did, if any of us went out there and thought we could do that, there'd probably be some people coming to get us, because that's not the way it works, folks. We don't have that power. We don't have that authority. But here we see Jesus did. So not only do we see he had power and authority over nature, let's continue on in verse 28 of that same text. Matthew 28:32, or through 32, it says, when he had come to the other side, so Jesus was going in, he was on the boat, going across the sea, they had a storm, he calmed the storm down. Now it says when he came to the other side. It's a continuation of the story. To the regions of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men met him as they came out of the tombs. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. These were bad dudes. And suddenly they shouted, "What do you have to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" A long way off from them, a large herd of pigs was feeding. "If you drive us out, The demons begged him, "Send us into the herd of pigs." And what was Jesus' simple reply? Go. Simple as that. 2-letter word. Go, he told them. So when they had come out, they entered the pigs, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the water. Simple statement. If you're going to cast us out, cast us into the herd of pigs, go. Again, power and authority possessed by Jesus Christ. And so we see not only does he have power over nature, he's got power over demons, but he also has power over Satan. So if you turn back a few more chapters and into chapter 4, lengthy text, but it's an important text. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 11, we see Jesus encountering Satan. It's right after his baptism. Right after his baptism, Jesus is led by the Spirit, it says, into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Verse 1, chapter 4. After he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. Be natural, wouldn't it? 40 days, 40 nights not eating, you'd be hungry. So it says he was hungry, and then what happened? The tempter approached him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." He answered, "It is written, man must not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes out of the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city, had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will give his angels orders concerning you, and they will support you with their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." And Jesus told him, "It is written, it is also written, do not test the Lord your God." And again the devil took him to the very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "I will give you all these things if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said, "Go away, Satan. For it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and the angels came and began to serve him. Again, a simple statement: go away, Satan. See, not only did we see that he had power and authority over nature, over demons, and over Satan, we see all authority has been given to him. And so these texts just give us that idea. These passages, along with others, not only show his authority over nature and demons and devil, but in Matthew 9, we also see he has authority over death, as well as human handicaps and illnesses and ailments. So when he stated everything has been given to him, he meant that God had granted him all authority. And it is with this authority that he makes those important words in Matthew 11, 28 through 30. It's with that authority that he says these words: "Come to me. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." See, since Jesus has all this authority, he has the authority to change our lives. He has the power and authority over anything or anyone we might face. He is the only one in the entire universe that can give us what we need. You see, we seek our daily bread through Him as we pray to our Father in heaven, as He gave that, what we call the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. And we find our ultimate need in the restoration of our relationship with God, as Jesus tells us that no one comes to the Father except through Him in John 14:6. See, His offer for us to have a relationship with Him are not mere words, but an offer that can change our lives by one who has the authority to do it. His offer to all who are weary and burdened is something we need. See, sometimes we might miss a portion of the meaning of that text. In Jesus' day, the people were living under the strain of the law, and the Jewish leaders who placed hundreds of demands and commands upon the people. Not only did the people have to deal with the need to keep all the commandments, but they were also burdened with all the traditions and interpretations that different religious leaders placed upon them. The Apostle Paul in the book of Acts calls the adherence to the law a yoke. That Apostle Peter, excuse me. And Paul in Galatians calls it the yoke of slavery in Galatians 5. The Talmud, which was the Torah, and also the traditions of the elders. So it was the law and the traditions called the Talmud, was an impossible burden for the people to bear. And Jesus calls us to cast that burden aside and come to Him. So what are our burdens? Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. And what will He give us? Rest. If you are trying to live a good moral life on your own, you're like the Hebrew people who were trying to live in obedience and compliance to the law, which we know it was impossible. We can't live a moral enough life to satisfy God. We can't live a moral life to satisfy and fulfill the law on our own. It's a yoke. It's a burden if we are trying to do this on our own, because we can't. Just like the Hebrew people realized. It is only by binding ourselves with Jesus that we can find peace and rest. Now, Jesus uses this word rest twice in the passage. When you think about it for a minute, when you are under a considerable burden, when life is pushing you down, when you just don't feel like getting out of bed because you're ready for life to kick you in the teeth again. When you have a burden like that, you need rest. You need peace. You need the tranquility that God can give us. Whether that's a physical burden or a burden of our souls, we need the rest that He can give. And by taking His yoke upon us, we find rest for our souls. When we find our rest, in Jesus, we lay aside the burden of perfect obedience to the law in order to justify ourselves before God. See, the book of Romans tells us that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, so we're all in the same boat. And under the law, one broken command means that we are a lawbreaker. And remember when I talked about the Talmud a minute ago? When you consider that the Talmud consisted of 613 commandments, one can quickly see that it would indeed have been a burden and an impossibility to not fail upon at least one of these teachings, whether it was a command of God or a teaching of one of the priests that had made its way into the Talmud. But Jesus offers us the freedom from all this. 613 commands that you got to obey every day on your way to work tomorrow. A lot of us can't even obey the few that we have to deal with. I was told last week that 55 mile an hour is the suggested speed limit. Man, well, I got pulled over this week. No, I didn't. But I'll have to keep that in mind. Well, that's just a suggestion, I thought, officer. Well, you're wrong again. Think about that. 613 commands that the people were required to obey in their lives. Be a burden, wouldn't it? Jesus has come. Jesus has made a difference in the world and has come to us and says, "Come to me, all you who are burdened and weary, and I will give you rest." So the question that I give to you today is, do you ever feel the burdens of life weighing down upon you? Do you ever feel the burden of life weighing down upon you? Stress at home, stress at work, stress with the kids, stress with life, stress with the kids, stress with the kids, right? Doesn't matter how old they are, right? Do you ever feel burdened and weighed down? How about when your mind tells you one thing and your body tells you another? I may have told you one day when I realized, as my brother says, my mind is writing checks that my body can't cash. I jumped out of the back of my pickup one day, a number of years ago. It wasn't just lately. And when I landed with a thud, I realized I wasn't 18 anymore. But what about it when our mind tells us one thing and our body tells us another? A husband and wife were getting ready for bed one evening, and the wife was... I shared this with my wife yesterday, and I probably shouldn't. But this is not me and her, but it was... She wasn't appreciate. She didn't appreciate it. But the wife was standing in front of a full-length mirror taking... She was taking a hard look at herself, and she said, "You know, dear, I look in the mirror and I see an old woman. My face all wrinkled, my hair is gray, my shoulders are hunched over, I've got fat legs, and my arms are all flabby." She turned to her husband and she said to him, "Tell me something positive to make me feel better about myself." The husband thought for a minute, really thinking about what he said. Wanted to tell her something that would make her feel better about herself. Something positive. And he said, "Well, there's nothing wrong with your eyesight." Oh, the burdens I carry sometimes. I told her this morning that did not apply to her. I found this on the internet. So she's not going to let me get on the internet anymore, I imagine. There are times in our life that we feel burdened. And there are times in our lives when we need more than just those around us who offer a helping hand. We need the one with the authority to change our lives and to improve our lives. We need God in our lives through Jesus Christ. And the invitation of Jesus is not only universal, but it's also conditional. You see, he says, take my yoke upon you as an invitation to follow him, but it's not without condition. The condition is that we learn from him. This call to be his disciple is more than just a one-time commitment, but is a life-changing experience that we are supposed to walk through. And in becoming his disciple, we see who he is. We see his character of being lowly and humble in heart, as he stated in his invitation. And when we take this yoke upon us, we will experience rest for our souls. And the thing about it is this. I believe that this rest is not only for today, but also for tomorrow. His yoke is not a burden, but a choice. His rest upon us brings us about a peace that we have because we are no longer burdened with trying to keep the law, but we find the peace of experiencing his grace that he gives us. And when I think of that peace that Christ gives, that rest, that burden-lifting experience, I'm reminded of the old hymn, It Is Well. The last two stanzas, verse 3 and 4 of that song goes, my sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought, my sin, not in part but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, O my soul. And the last verse says, for me, be it Christ. Be it Christ, hence to live. If dark hours about me shall roll, no pang shall be mine, for in death as in life, thou wilt whisper thy peace to my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. Take his yoke upon you and experience his peace and his rest that he offers. Let's pray.